Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Western Bulldogs podcast, Barclay Street, after a little hiatus for our, and this of course brought to you by our great friends Mercedes-Benz Vans. It's been too long, Skipper. How are you? How are you holding up?
It has been, mate. It's holding up okay. The sun's shining here up on the coast. Clearly, footy-wise, we would have loved to have been going a little bit better. The last 3 weeks haven't been awesome for us. We've had a few chances, but hanging in there okay, mate. But we're always thinking of our friends and family back home, mate, back in Melbourne and dealing with the lockdown and stage 4, mate. So always thinking of you guys there, but going okay. How are you going, mate?
Yeah, we're going okay. We'll get to that in a minute. Just want to point out to keen listeners of Barclay Street and any subscribers to hashtag Barclay Street, they will have noticed a certain pattern that since the podcast just had a little sort of mid-year break, the wind's dried up, and just want to know if you would like to make a comment on the relation between this podcast and the form of the Bulldogs.
I don't know if there's a direct correlation. The Wi-Fi up here hasn't been great, mate, I'll be honest. So it just has probably been an inhibitor. A lot of people using up all the Wi-Fi. A lot of Netflix going on. We've just been,
Netflix.
You would take it there. It's been a bit of a struggle. No, you know what? You are right. Since we've stopped, probably I had our little mid-season break. We haven't been able to get one on the board. So, you know what? This is why we thought we'd roll out the big guns and use everything we can this week to get things going our way.
How have you kind of reflected on the last 3 weeks? Because, it's you can look at it from a few different angles. None of them particularly great. When you don't, when you have 3 losses in a row, it's never going to be, pristine. But they are, three of the contenders this year. You're sort of a bit let down that you couldn't get over one of them because there was high hopes for the Dogs this year. Maybe there still is. But it was like you went up against the heavyweights and just weren't able to get over the top of any of them after a good start against the previous 2, Port and Brisbane.
Yeah, no, I do. You do throughout any season, obviously, look forward to every game, particularly against the top sort of handful or top bunch. And I think one thing we've sort of always as a club been able to do is sort of turn up against the good teams and obviously battle and at times been done maybe an experience or a bit of maturity, and that's probably been a little bit the case with a little bit the last 2 games, not as much the Richmond one because they had us pretty much cold from start to finish. So that one in my eyes is the biggest, I guess the most disappointing one because we'd been building some momentum, built some form over the previous sort of couple of weeks, and then Richmond had sort of come out and really just sort of dominated the game from the word go. And we managed to compete a little bit better throughout the second half of that one, but really lost a chance to sort of push ourselves against one of the better teams. And they're really starting to get cooking now, the Tigers. But the Port Adelaide one, again, we had a heap of opportunities at different times, dominated the game, especially early, and just couldn't capitalise on it. And then they had a good patch in the third quarter. We were not so good. And that sort of spells the end of the game a little bit, despite a little bit of a fight back in the last quarter and opportunities still coming. And then, again, with the game just gone, started the game well, had probably about an 8-minute patch where they just put on 4 or 5 goals and gapped us late in that second quarter. And couldn't get ourselves sort of back into sort of striking distance. So I think what you can take from those 2 games is we're definitely capable enough and good enough. Just need to be able to play through the quarters and minutes better and more consistently so that we don't have those lapses in whether it's concentration or fatigue creeps in or whatever the case may be, just trying to really steel ourselves for the whole game. And even when those swings of momentum do come, being sort of good enough and aware enough of how to stop them and then just sort of build the game back up towards our way. So it has been a little bit disappointing. We would have loved to have definitely won all of them or at least a couple of them, but not to be. So we've just got to now sort of process and move forward.
Has the group got another surge in it? You still got a bit of life in this season? Do you get that sense from the group?
I think so. We had a main training session yesterday, which it's felt like a while since we've had a main session with the sort of condensed fixture. Like a main session,
Yeah.
as we would know, is normally a good training run of about sort of 7-8 sort of clicks, where we've sort of only been doing sort of little ones here and there with the sort of mix of 4 and 5 day breaks. So you feel like we got a proper opportunity to get out there and train some things that we've been wanting to do in games, and just sort of tick a few boxes. And we're a lot of clubs might be like this, but very feel based of how things are feeling is generally a good sense of how things are going to go. So from a training energy and an intensity point of view, there are a lot of blokes out there wanting to get, improve and get better. So I feel like, yeah, we can definitely push again and make something hopefully the back end of this season.
How have you found the condensed part of the season?
I mean, obviously it's a first for everyone dealing with it. So from a physical perspective, I found it okay. I think with the shortened quarters and the shortened game, you definitely find yourself pulling up sort of pretty well within 2 or 3 days if you haven't got
Yeah.
any big knocks or any ailments, I guess you'd call them. So I think by day 3 or so, you're feeling pretty good, almost back to normal and ready to work through it. There's probably a period where you got to work through and find your second wind in the game, and once you get that, you're certainly feeling pretty good. So physically, it's been okay. The mental aspect is another challenge of dealing with a lot more sort of footy in a shortened period of time and being able to get that bit of mental break between sort of games and training. So that's one thing I think everyone can deal with and treat differently, but does present
Is it,
itself as a challenge.
is it a bit of a balance though? Have, and I'm just guessing here from the outside.
Mm.
So with shortened games, has there been less kind of reviewing,
Yeah,
preparing? You know what I mean? Like so less
yeah,
meetings, so less time in your head there. But you just got to play, try and get some training in, then just play again, and just sort of the
yeah.
thing rolls.
It's definitely like a more sharper focus sort of process. Like you do just focus on the one or two key things that
Yeah,
you take from that game. But the way we, probably most clubs do is treat it is that as soon as that game finishes, you're preparing for the next one, as
yeah,
opposed to reviewing the
yeah,
game that's just gone. You're almost doing it in preparation for the next game. So it's like, what are the key
yeah.
things out of this game that are going to then help
So that,
us
yeah,
move into the
because
next?
that's how.
So
Yeah.
it's almost prep. Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's like so. If you play Saturday to Saturday, my
Mm,
memory of it was always
yeah,
Monday, Tuesday is review, and then
yeah,
Thursday, Friday preview. So is it almost like
yeah.
it just becomes like a hybrid middle of the
Yeah,
day,
correct.
middle
Yeah,
of the process?
yeah, which is super important. And our club, and I'm sure many others have been like this, have been incredibly focused on trying to have that mental release and not have the meetings and the review side of things as heavy or onerous as what they probably have been in the past. They're just really trying
Yeah,
to keep players and staff too. That's the real thing, that we have to acknowledge and face. There's a lot of staff up here who are doing an
yeah,
enormous amount of work and are checked in quite a lot of the time to help the players and the season sort of continue to roll. Is that they need to make sure staff are staying fresh too, and are still able to get their
yeah.
spare and free time to mentally check out as well. So you're right, it's a balance, but yeah, trying to stay mentally fresh is definitely just as important as you can sort of physically.
So with your hub life at the moment, have you moved venues? Whereabouts are you at the moment?
Yeah,
What's your
we, we moved
lifestyle
from
like?
we moved from the Mcrae, which I think was where we probably had our last
Yeah,
chat, our last Barclay Street pod, to now the RACV Royal Pines, which if you're talking sort of detail structurally, this place is a bit more of a vertical sort of hotel. So
yeah,
you spend a lot, obviously, more time going sort of up and down, whereas the last one was a bit more of I want to say more of like a motel, if you like. Like it was very good, but it was probably only 2 levels of
yeah,
rooms, and they sort of all were in a U shape around the pool and the meals room. So
yeah,
it was just different, a bit dynamic wise. And plus, we're here with a few other teams and a lot more families and whatnot. So you do cross paths with a lot of people. But the amenities are great. Like, we've got some great facilities here. There's a field. I'm staying on the field side of the hotel, and there's a nice big sort of rugby soccer pitch out here that we get to train at during especially the short and condensed period. They got great sort of recovery access. They've got a gym, big team meeting rooms, and sort of team chill out areas. So it's been great from that perspective, just being able to spend time together in these sort of communal areas.
Can I ask about a couple of teammates? We'll start with the ones hopefully coming back or staying in at the moment. Can you give us an update on Lockie and JJ?
Yeah. Lockie's going okay. He's back to sort of training, and he's participated in a few of our match sims as well the last few sort of week or two, I reckon. So you're just trying to support Lockers as best you can as a teammate and as a club for sort of when sort of he's ready, I guess. So obviously keen to have him back when he can. And then JJ just had a little roll of the ankle the other day at training. So as far as I know, there wasn't a scan required, which is normally a pretty good sign when you're talking sort of damage or structurally. That he's got another probably couple of days, a day or two, I reckon, to basically be assessed to hopefully being able to play. So hopefully we can get that one through. But yeah, lots probably still to sort of play out in the next day or two.
Yeah. And what about so Jack Mcrae, he's a bit of a phenomenon, Jack, how he just fronts up every week and gets a pile of the ball, and then mix that in with Mitch Wallace, who's making a real, like renaming himself really as a sort of full forward who's, he's not getting heaps of possessions like Jack, but he's having a massive impact on the game at the moment and looks really dangerous, and he's kicking goals every week.
Yeah, we talk a lot internally, Bob, about the quality over sort of quantity involvement, and I guess that when you look at those two players, they differ because Mitch is probably not getting as much access as what Jack is in the midfield, but like you said, really having an impact on the game because of his one-on-one ability. Like, he's definitely this season presenting himself as one of the best sort of one-on-one players sort of in the competition. I think definitely at our football club because of his strength and ability to outbody smaller opponents, but also sort of medium to big opponents. So he's a very accurate kick of goal too, Mitch. So you really do want the ball in his hands, sort of inside 50 when he's within sort of scoring distance. But he's been incredibly reliable for us as a player up forward this season. And like you said, to shift your role after playing a lot or most of his career as a midfielder to then go and have to deal with not getting as much access to the ball, as a forward, there's a lot of time where you're not involved or you potentially sort of feel like you can drift and be out of the game. And when the ball does come down there and in your direction, you got to make the most of it. So he's done that incredibly well, Mitch, and as a leader of the football club, setting a bloody good example. And then Jack, like you said, who's just he always has had an ability to get an enormous amount of the ball, but being more and more influential probably with his possessions and his pressure and defensive elements of his game. He's playing a pretty complete game at the minute, Jack, which is really impressive.
We've got a few minutes left before we go to our very special guest, and we're going to take a little bit of a trip down memory lane with Chris Grant after this short break. But are you feeling confident about Sunday? We need to get back on the winners list against the Crows.
We do, 100%. And I am, because I know what we're capable of. I know that the group is capable of, producing great football in 4 quarters. So we just got to obviously get back to playing sort of our best football for longer. And can sometimes come across as a cliche, but it is the sort of hard truth of it. We just got to do things better for longer. So confident that we can get back there if we can produce the quality that we know we're capable of, mate. I think we can definitely get back on the winners list.
Tough times don't last, but tough people do, Marcus. That's
you got away with words. You always have, mate. You always have. Who'd you steal that one from?
No, I haven't had an original thought in a long time. Why don't we have a little break and we'll come back with, the doyen, the great man himself, Chris Grant, to chat about that goal from that game in the year 2000 that broke Bombers' hearts. And just, after 3 losses, sometimes it's just good to go back and just warm the soul with a little bit of nostalgia, and hopefully that kickstarts something on field for you and your comrades, mate.
Let's do it.
Welcome back to the Western Bulldogs podcast, Barclay Street, and it's our great pleasure to welcome one of our own, but one of our royal own, Chris Grant. Chris, welcome to Barclay Street. Thanks for coming on. It's nice to finally get you on.
Thanks, Bob. No, the pleasure's mine. Thanks, Bont, for having me on. I know we've been trying to tee this up for a few weeks now, so it's nice to see you.
Yeah, well, we finally we passed the hat around, and we finally got the enough coin in the hat.
Big fish, isn't it? We caught a big one, didn't we?
Very commercial. I mean,
I'd like to see that hat, Bob. We're going to two 10-cent pieces or a 50-cent piece.
It's just the discrepancy of like Matty Robbins paid us to get on the podcast. We had to pay you quite a lot, but no, you're here out of the goodness of your own heart. And we thought was chatting to Bont, and I thought the best way to bring the podcast back, you've got to make a bit of a splash. That's how this this media juggernaut or media swamp
headlines
works. Yeah, you've got to make a bit of a splash. Yes. And it did occur to us that it was the anniversary recently of that game and that goal. And when I say that to the Bulldogs faithful, I think they know exactly what we're talking about. So, Granny, can you take us back to the year 2000 and just sort of set the scene of where the Bulldogs team was at, where you were at, and this really where the Bombers were at, because it was a great story, a great game of footy, but the story is a juggernaut because of what the Bombers team was at the competition at that time.
Yeah, no, it was hard to believe, mate, that it's that long ago, firstly. Mm-hmm. I'm sure those supporters and members that'll be watching would scratch their heads to think that it was that long ago. But to paint a little bit of the picture leading up until that, if you remember, we had a pretty successful team during the late 1990s. 97, 98 prelims. 99, unfortunately, we bowed out in straight sets, but we still had a very good home and away season. So, but the Bombers were on the up, and we were probably on the slide. We'd sort of probably missed our opportunity, and the Bombers were just ramping up. And if you remember their 1999 season, the famous prelim final versus the Blues at the MCG, where Dean Wallace tried to take on the world, and Fraser Brown brought him down. They should have actually been playing in the grand final the year before as well. So, and their team was just flying. So to paint the picture, we'd sort of had a few injuries during 2000. We hadn't really hit much form. We'd sort of been quite patchy. We were still in finals contention, but probably in the bottom half of the 8, not the top half of the 8. And as we know with the Bombers, they didn't look like sort of getting beaten for the majority of the year. What we did know, though, and Plough, our coach at the time, Terry Wallace, had set the scene very, very well, that in the few weeks leading up to that game, that they won, but they weren't convincing. It was almost like they were holding off for the final series. There was only a couple of weeks to go to the final, so maybe they'd sort of held themselves back a little bit. But Plough set the scene wonderfully well. He had us during the week on the Tuesday, and set the scene. And the scene was the night of frustration. So he titled it as the night of frustration. And he said, look, normally I'd go into a game and I'd say, we're going to have some tactics here and there, and we'll have a chance of winning. But he didn't say that, much to our surprise. He said, boys, look, I would normally say that, but I'm not going to tell you that tonight. What I'm going to tell you is if we try and take these guys on, we've got no chance of beating them. So that made us feel really good about ourselves.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate the vote of confidence.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
How did that? I mean, so I was in the room with you, but I was a naive green 18-year-old. When you were sort of sitting in there, were you kind of what was going through your head? That's a strange moment, I would imagine, for a player of your standing at the time.
it was. But he said it well, because he then followed up with, but I reckon we can get them, because firstly, they're not absolutely cherry ripe at the moment. They've sort of put the queue in the rack, almost sort of saving themselves for finals. And that's subconsciously, as players, you start to do that a bit.
Yeah.
So they're vulnerable. But we're going to do something very, very different. We're going to implore this very strange tactic that I'm going to take you through. And we're going to frustrate the hell out of them for the best part of most of the night, with a view of staying as close to them as we possibly can on the scoreboard. And then we're going to open the floodgates and take them on. And I just want you guys in that last 10, 15 minutes, even if it's the last quarter that I'll let you and release you, let you go. We want you to bring out your best. But we're going to have to work as 18 on the field at the time. We're just going to stop them scoring. So he then set the scene on the whiteboard. And if you remember, Bob, a bit of this sort of happened down in Werribee as well. We'd sort of had issues with Whitten Oval. And so we're actually training at Werribee. And then the night session, he actually took us out, and we pretty much trained it the whole night. And that was 18 centre bounce, and then the forwards would scoot down back. The ball would be kicked into what was classed as our defensive 50, and then we'd try and work the ball through. So we've really trained it twice for that week. And as I say, like a good coach does, he set the visible and the visual elements of it very, very well for us, and told the story well. And of course, we arrived on that Friday night knowing exactly what we were going to do.
So was this tactical shift? Was it sort of I was probably only 5 or 6 at the time, I think. Was
unnecessary.
Every now and again, just a reminder. So was this something very groundbreaking at the time, to have this many players move up that part of the ground, or was it always sort of a tactical sort of shift that teams had used, or was it sort of newish? I don't know.
No, it was very new, Marcus, to that extreme. Rodney Eade was coach of Sydney during that sort of period as well, and he'd had a reasonably sort of defensive tactic of pushing and flooding back a little bit, but it was only sort of 1 or 2 players that would go back, and they'd almost play what we'd call now as a seventh defender inside 50 the whole game. But this was pretty extreme. So if the idea was, and Plough set the scene, that if the idea was, if the ball was in our defensive 50, he didn't want to see anyone in our forward half. So that meant that, all 18 players, which is probably today's game in some ways. But visually, when you set it up at training, you can actually see, it's going to be very, very hard for this team to score. And because they weren't prepared for it, it was almost a surprise attack. It was going to be very difficult in a short space of time for them to be able to work it out. And of course, over the course of the night, certainly for 3 quarters, that's how it played out.
Granny, did you have a sense that, win, lose or draw, that it would be a big story? Because I was at school, I was still in year 12 at the time, and going to Footscray City, and a bit of a space cadet, has to be said.
But failing.
And I remember being at school that week and sitting on these, and there were kids that I went to school with who were Essendon supporters, and they're sort of, getting stuck, they're going to flog you and all. And I remember just sort of thinking, just you wait and see because this game of footy on Friday night is not going to look like any game of football that's ever been played. So I, in my own naive thoughts, knew that this was going to be pretty wildly different. Did you have a sense for that?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, that's where the energy and the charge for us as players came from, because this sort of surprise attack that Plough sort of set up so well in our minds, we were very aware of what we were attempting to do, and we're all in sync. Those moments where, we're in sync here. We know exactly what we're going to do. and that's a surprise attack sort of mentality is always gives you a little bit of enthusiasm. So we did arrive. What was the first year of games being played at the Telstra Dome, as it was known then.
And Colonial, it might have been Colonial
Oh,
Stadium.
it might have been Colonial. No, I think you're right. Colonial Stadium. And then we took them on. So yeah, that charge that we had as players all came from the whole story that Plough had set up so well through the week.
So you mentioned before, like during the game, at some point you were sort of gonna either release the shackles or it was just gonna so you didn't move down there with the intent every time to flood and then basically rip back and attack on the way back. At what point did the message come out? Righto, let's let it rip here, just play. Is that how it played out, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I know you're right, Marcus, and a good question, because Plough said that at some point in time, depending on what the scoreboard's like and what we feel that Essendon, whether they're sort of physically struggling a little bit, we'll release you at some point. Now, that might be at 3/4 time, probably the earliest, or it might be at some the last quarter, but be ready for it. So, throughout the game, and I've sort of said this a few times, it was actually quite amazing how well it turned out. But also, if you remember, they had players like Michael Long and Carousella and Ramanauskas who would just run the ball, just take off from half back. And I can visibly remember, I was playing centre half forward for the night, but invariably ended up sort of behind the ball a lot because of the tactics. And we can remember coming down, and early in the game in the first quarter, they had plenty of inside 50s. It was just extraordinary. I'd like to see the number, actually. But each time that we got the ball and turned it over, it felt like we were able to score because they were a little bit out of position of where they would normally place themselves. So we found ourselves actually scoring not too bad over the course of the night by as you say, as you call it now, ripping back into forward 50. So, and the confusion on the ball carrier's face, sort of looking back on it, was quite humorous because Michael Long and those guys coming down after they realised that they just pumped it inside 50 and we were intercept marking because we had so many numbers back there. They, by the end of the first quarter, they just weren't sure where to kick it. So they did a lot of patrolling, sort of chip kicking across the top of the 50 early in the game, just trying to sort of work it all out. So Plough's tactics worked really well. And it was at the 3/4 time mark where Plough said, look, I'm going to hold on it for another 5 minutes, and then the runner's going to come out. Chris Burton, as Bob will remember, he's going to come out and let you go. And off we went. And the rest is history. Yeah.
I would ask you more questions about the tactics, because it is a fascinating exploration. But there is a portion of general footy supporters out there who hate the flooding of modern footy. So I feel like if we go too far, far into it, we actually might become culpable.
We've got to keep our ratings up too.
Yeah, we don't want to be the poster boys for ruining the game. We're just soldiers sent in to do a job. If you've got a problem, if you think the Bulldogs ruined footy, take it up with Plough. Granny, there was a brawl at half time, I think. You're too much of a fair ball player, gentleman, to get involved in that, wouldn't you?
Oh, I'd been suspended for 2 years before, so probably can't class myself as being gentlemanly like. But that was Jono. That was Jono carrying on like an immature school kid. He and Johnny Barnes had a bit of a run-in in the second quarter, and then it sort of spilled out into half time. But when we came in, and that's a good segue into, at half time when we came in, Plough was roaring, saying, we've got them exactly where we want them. Because, that huddle, so that melee at half time was pretty big. I mean, everyone was involved in it. And then it dispersed, and their energy was sort of waning and just completely confused with what was going on. And ours was growing because it was exactly sort of where we wanted to place them. So, and these are all sort of the emotions that play out in the course of the game, and ebbs and flows. But But Plough was very, very good with being able to sort of communicate at halftime of, as I say, we've got them exactly where we want them. One more quarter to go. One more quarter.
I was only a young kid when Plough was kept, but he had an amazing ability, didn't he, to create a world within a world. Like for that week or for that cluster of games, he could create scenarios and a theme and a world where you had to sort of buy into this sort of different reality.
Yeah, very much so. Well, to go back a little bit for you, I mean, he took over those last few games of 1996, but he set the scene beautifully for our pre-season of 97. And remembering, and those that would remember, it was Fitzroy's last year. We'd finished 15th, they'd finished 16th. So by the start of the following year, which was 1997, effectively we were starting as wooden spooners. It was almost like we were the last in the competition from the year before.
Yeah.
And he set that scene beautifully for pre-season to lead in. And then we went from basically wooden spooners to prelim finalists by the end of the year. So it was an extraordinary coaching effort, really.
Yeah. We're going to roll the footage in a second, Granny, but you're the sort of bloke who I know would have watched this back many, many, many times. So can you remember? Here's a little quiz for you. Can you remember what the scores were and what the time on the clock was?
When Dustin kicked it on the full.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we knew that there was only a couple of minutes to go, and in fact, Nathan Eagleton was having a shot. The reason it ended up in that sort of far right-hand pocket was because Nathan Eagleton was having a shot from about 40, 45 metres out on the left-hand side, but not a huge sort of difficult angle for him. And it was a beautiful kick, Nathan Eagleton. So the runner had actually been out and said, couple minutes to go. There's only 2 minutes to go. So we knew there wasn't long. And Nathan Eagleton was lining up to put us in front because at that point we were a point down. And we're thinking, shit, he's either going to miss it and we're level with him, or he's going to kick it and we're going to be in front. So the message had come out that if he does kick it, we've got to get numbers back to try and shore it up. Of course, Nathan goes back, and as you know, Bob, not only was he a beautiful kick, he'd thump at 60 metres with his set shots at times, and he shanked it to the far right-hand side. So the pack from the goal square went out to that pocket, and it sort of bumbled around and fell to Dustin's feet, and it just almost rolled off his toes over. Literally, the ball went for only about a metre, but it was enough to go over the line on the full.
And as soon as the situation revealed itself, so the ball was going to go to you. I think Billy tried to steal it there for a little bit. It goes to you. Were you always going to snap it around your body on the left, or had you thought about different options?
No, you're right about Billy. I don't know where Billy came from, but he came from about 20 metres away and picked up the ball, which, to be honest, I was quite happy with because, as you know, he was a little master.
You were probably ranked 1 and 2 as our best options, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but certainly Billy, with his ability to snag those screw kicks and everything, he was extraordinary at it. So we're actually quite happy to have the ball in his hands. And then I got called back, and I thought, oh shit, what am I going to do here? Yeah. So getting back to your question though, I was always going to swing on to my left-hand side, or swing out to my left-hand side. And what I do remember, and I've actually seen Blake.
I want to watch it.
Since Blake Carosella was actually guarding that 5 metre space to my left-hand side. Yeah. So because it was such a tight angle, I was out of bounds, and I knew that I'd only had a few steps to really take to my left-hand side before he'd be able to get a hand in and smother it. Yeah. So I had to make a quick sort of hand or foot decision with the left-hand side, and she sailed through.
Last question from me.
No, come on, let's roll the tape. I want to watch it.
Got one last question. I just want to build it. Was it one of those kicks? Because on the foot, it looks like just one of those sweet timing kicks. Off the boot, did you think it was home?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
But as soon as it hit my foot, it was, as you
Touched the
say,
leather. Right.
made that beautiful sound, and it didn't look like missing. As soon as it left my foot, it was always going to go through. So, and of course, Billy, I ran towards Billy, and I was good mates with Billy. He was number 2, as you know, at the time, until the great Bob Murphy took it over. But he ran towards me. We were sort of cuddling for the next 20 minutes. So.
You look like you take off after it, though, don't you? You sort of take off. Are you heading straight back? Was that where everyone was heading, or what?
Yeah, that's right. Because as I say, Nathan Egan had that shot, and the runner had already said if we score or we kick a goal, we've got to get back. So, but I think in the vision, you might see the runner come back in and sort of push back, making sure I do go back.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've whet the appetite enough. Famous, as they say in the classics, roll the tape.
Off hands, Fletcher out in the full.
It is 2.
Out on the full from Fletcher.
How many mistakes can the Bombers make?
Well, Collingwood's got it.
He's got to kick a banana, sure.
I mean, if the siren's set...
Oh, Chris Grant's got it.
Grant's got it.
Well,
I'll tell you what,
he's
a couple
flat
of years ago,
too.
I said Carey would have kicked a goal in Perth that Grant didn't make. This is the sort of goal that the champ might kick here.
I reckon that stung him a bit, and he wants these.
Will he kick a banana, or will he run out onto the left foot?
This is where Hudson was last week, exactly the same spot.
36th position.
Over left foot.
He kicked the goal to bring him back into the game. It's a great kick. He's kicked it. A magnificent effort. He will be a hero forever if they win this match.
Surely they're home this time. Now, if you have a look at this, they will flood the ground something fierce now.
Look at the centre square, boys.
They have only 3 players forward of the centre circle.
There's the kick.
Do they get a message to tell them how long to go? Do they get the message out?
You would be sending the runner out to tell them.
Jeepers.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah,
So,
I just noticed, Bob and Marcus, it was actually Peter Quill who was the runner. So I think we said, with Quilly. So,
the commentary's really fascinating there. So Bruce mentioned the Carey goal that you would have kicked a goal that you had missed. Was that part of the context of that moment for you?
no, not at the time for me. At the time, no thought of that. I do remember that game. We'd actually played West Coast, the one that Bruce was referring to, and we'd kicked eight goals in the first quarter at the Wacker.
I remember that.
West Coast, and then in the second quarter they kicked 8, and I'd taken a mark right on the siren of half time, but I was about 50 out, and that's where Bruce said, "Well, Carey had kicked this," and I didn't. I actually don't think I made the distance, or I shanked it or something. So that's the one he was referring to. But so I wasn't thinking at the time, but I did understand the responsibility at the time. Knowing only just 30 seconds before that we only had a couple of minutes to go. So, and it wasn't a thought of just got to try and score. It was, I've got to kick this goal. So it's amazing how it worked out.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we should tip the hat to the Bombers, because it's an amazing story in isolation, but the bigger picture is because of how great that team was, and it turns out to be the loss they had to have because they went on to win the premiership. But it was the Bulldogs' night, but it really was your night, Granny, and I think in the context of your career, it's something you should be proud of, I'm sure, but it's for Bulldogs supporters and for your teammates at the time. It gave us an enormous sense of pride. And I don't want to soil it. I don't like. I really.
He always does this.
Just looking back at it, then you did play on, and you are actually outside the boundary, and so I mean there is an argument for
video
and so.
I was on the buddy arse. Buddy can. I was on the buddy arse. It was a great night, and I think because remember this is many years. It's another 16 years before You guys ended up, winning the premiership in 2016. So it's, there was a lot of frustration and disappointment over many years for Dogs fans, and we'd missed out on prelims and things like that. So it was a little bit of sort of, the small guys against the big guys element as well. And that's why I think it was so special for Bulldog supporters. But if you listen to that again, like I will later, and watch it back, the crowd was just phenomenal. It was.
And there was a lot of people there. It looked like a packed house.
Yeah.
It was rocking.
It was an Essendon home game, I think, and they were just trying to get that that complete season, that perfect season.
Yeah,
so they were
perfect.
Back to the cup.
Well, Granny, it was as enjoyable as I wanted it to be. I'm sure Bulldog supporters will love it to go down memory lane. Thanks for having a chat with us.
Good on you guys. Pleasure.
Good on you.